Greetings. I'm speaking to you from Stockholm, Sweden. I arrived around 10 days ago from Kiev, and I spent a lot of time in Sweden the past year. But after being in Kiev, I've realized that the prices in Sweden are quite high compared to Kiev. For example, I could get a 3-course meal at a good restaurant in Kiev for the price of a drink in Stockholm. So I was thinking of going to other places as well. I was thinking about Finland. But anyway, let's move on to the topic at hand today, which is the key to financial freedom, which is passive income. So I wrote an article about this on medium.com. I encourage you guys to sign up for a membership for Medium because you can read a lot of articles that can be helpful to you. And I have a link in the description below, so sign up for a membership through that link and read my article because that goes more in depth in what I'm going to talk about today. So I want to start off with a history lesson about the traditional aristocracy. So in historical times, the economic divide was between the nobles who owned the land and the peasants and slaves who worked the land. Of course, this is rough. There are some outliers, such as small farmers and farmers who own small plots of land, but overall the economic divide was between those who owned the land and those who worked the land. And those who owned the land, the big nobles, aren't usually working on the land. They have other people to work on the land for them, and they have other people to manage their business affairs for them. This provided the nobles with passive income. Because they owned all this land and they have other people working on that land, that generated income for them without them actually have to work to maintain it, or at least they don't have to put a lot of effort to maintain it. However, when they acquire that land, often that comes through warfare. They can win that land through war, or they can win that land by exchanging military service or governmental service. And sometimes they just purchase that land. So to acquire that land that generates passive income for them does require work. It requires their warrior achievements, or it requires governmental service or some kind of service, or it requires money from them to purchase the land. But once they acquire that land, it's theirs, and they can have peasants to work on it, and they can have more educated commoners to manage their affairs for them, so they get passive income. And this allowed the nobles to enjoy a lot of leisure. They had a lot of leisure time. So outside of going to war, during peace times, they would have time to go to balls and tournaments and a lot of social events. They had a lot of time to go hunting, to play sports, to go swimming. Indoors, they could play chess, they could read, they could write, they could paint, they could contribute to the cultural development of their nation. And they had a lot of time to live life to the fullest and enjoy the pleasures of life. The reason why the nobles were able to enjoy a lot of leisure time during peacetime is because they had passive income coming from their land. And even during war times, when they go off to war, they can still generate passive income from their land without tending to their land because they're at war. And that is because they have people working on that land for them. And I know today we have passed that feudal economic era, and we don't live in that sort of economic environment anymore. But that doesn't mean that passive income doesn't exist. And in fact, there are even more sources of passive income today. So for example, if you own the businesses, if you own the real estate, if you own the intellectual property, such as the books, the films, the inventions, the patents, and if you own the media platforms that all drive the modern world, if you own all these things, then you are at the top of the financial hierarchy, and you are getting your income often from passive income from these sources, because businesses create profits, and if you own those businesses, you can collect on those profits. Real estate can generate rental income. If you own the real estate, you can collect on that. And if your real estate can produce agricultural produce or natural resources, then you can monetize that even more. And also, if you have intellectual property, such as if you wrote a book or if you own rights to a film or to a song or to a music album or whatever, then you can monetize that as well. Additionally, if you own the media platforms, the social media channels, the blogs, the websites, and things that people consume online or even in traditional forms of media like newspapers or television, if you own those intellectual property rights and if you own those social media platforms, then you can monetize that as well. So today you can still make a lot of money from passive income, and in fact, if you do own these things that drive the modern world, then you are at the top of the financial hierarchy. But ever since industrialization and the rise of the middle class, the education system and popular media have emphasized the importance of getting a good job or career for securing your financial security. And I don't think this is the best path to financial freedom. In fact, it won't make you financially free. Because if you think about it, if you rely on your salary as your main source of income or your only source of income, then you are essentially like the peasants and slaves of traditional times. You are bound to your job, and if you lose that job, you have no other income to support you. So that makes you very vulnerable. For example, if you want to leave, you don't like your job anymore, that's very difficult because if you don't get another job quickly, then you don't have any income coming in and you can go bankrupt, you can fall into poverty. Likewise, if your employer doesn't like you and fires you, then you have that poverty thrusted upon you. Also, if your employer fails and the business you work for fails or the organization you work for fails, then you also lose your job. So this is kind of similar to the peasants and slaves of traditional times, because they can't leave their land or they can't leave their lord or master, because if they do leave, they have nothing to sustain themselves with and they'll fall into poverty. They don't have much choice. And if their lord or master doesn't like them, then if they can exile them, and that would also mean poverty for them, or they could do worse to them as well. So actually it was even worse back then. And also if, let's say, their lord or master got conquered or their lands get invaded and something bad happens to the lands that their lord or master owns, then something bad can happen to them. The invading army could massacre them, they could fall into bad times if the land is damaged, if things get burned down, and their fate is really intertwined with the lord or master that they're bound to, and that is very similar to the modern day. And I think some people have the illusion that they're free because they can change jobs, but you are still bound to a job if you rely on a salary as your main source of income. You might switch employers, you can do that, but you're still bound to a job, and I don't think that makes you financially free. Of course, there are higher paying jobs, and some people do get jobs that require more skill, more education, but I think it's the same thing, because if that is your main source of income or your only source of income, then if that job goes away, if you lose your job some way or another, then you are in a pretty bad financial situation, because then you'll be thrusted into poverty unless you find another job. So you are really just bound to your job until you're 60 or 70. And once you reach that age, you might have some savings, you might have a pension, but then you still have the financial restraints of not being able to spend that much, because you can't overspend or you'll run out of savings or you'll run out of your money from your pension. So you aren't financially free. And I think, again, this is pretty similar to the peasants and slaves of past times, because actually, if you read history, there were a lot of jobs that required higher education. So for example, during ancient Rome, there were slaves who could be teachers, who could be engineers, who could be doctors, which are today very respectable professions. And during the Ottoman Empire, slaves could become government officials, they could become elite warriors, called the janissaries. So there are enjoyable jobs back then for peasants and slaves and commoners, just like there are enjoyable jobs now. And I'm sure some of you do enjoy your jobs, and that is great. But it doesn't make you financially free, because you are not the master of your own fate. Your job can go away, you can lose your job, you can get fired, your employer or your organization can collapse, and it makes you reliant and not self-sufficient, and it doesn't allow you to be truly financially free. And I want to add that it really is a rat race when you're relying on a salary for your main source of income, because you have to go to work and you have to pay the bills, and then you have to repeat the cycle over and over again until you retire in your 60s or 70s. And when you do retire, you have to make sure you don't run out of your savings and pension money. So you can't determine your own schedule. You can't determine what you want to do with your time. You can't determine when you want a vacation because your employer has to approve. You can't determine a lot of things, and you can't spend your time working on the things you would really want to do if financial considerations were not restraining you from doing them. And you are allowing your life to be dictated by financial necessity, which means that you are not financially free. The point of my historical analogies is to highlight the similarities between wage slavery and historical forms of servitude. One way to free yourself from being financially bound to your job is to become self-employed. That way you are in charge of your source or sources of income. And that is similar to the middle class of earlier times, the independent farmers who own small plots of land, the bakers and blacksmiths who own their own shops, or the physicians who own their own practices. And you can even think about the itinerant knights and samurai of medieval Europe or medieval Japan, who did not have their own land but were still a warrior class and were still respected and still worked for money and were self-employed. You can also think about the bounty hunters of the American Old Wild West. So if you are self-employed, that will give you a bit more financial freedom, and you are in charge of your own sources of income, which is great. And it is a good path towards acquiring passive income, but to really become financially free, you need to acquire and build your sources of passive income, because passive income allows you to really have cash coming in even when you're not working. And it doesn't take a lot to maintain sources of passive income. For example, when you spend all your cash and you have sources of passive income, then those sources of income will still come flowing in even after you have spent the cash you have. So it's harder to go bankrupt, and you have a lot more financial security. And that is very similar to the aristocrats and nobles of past times, who often spent all the money they had, but because their land was still producing income from them, that was not a problem. They were not financially vulnerable. However, passive income sources take work to acquire and grow. Even if you are able to acquire sources of passive income, you are not financially free until those sources of passive income can generate enough money for you to live comfortably without a job, or live the lifestyle you want to live. Likewise, aristocrats of earlier times also had to acquire land if they wanted to improve their standard of living or to become even more wealthy than they already are. And that often involves going to war to acquire land, or fighting for their kings or lords or emperors and getting land in exchange for military service, or serving in the government of their monarchs in exchange for land, or just using the money they have and save to purchase even more land, which will generate more passive income for them. So the similarities between the people who own passive income today and the nobles and aristocrats of earlier times is very close, because both are on top of the financial hierarchy. They own the things that drive the world they live in. And for the nobles and aristocrats, that is the land. The land was the main source of economic income. And for the people today, You can be owning the businesses, the real estate, the intellectual property, the media platforms. These are the things that drive the modern world today, and if you own these things, then you are on top of the financial hierarchy, and you can become very wealthy and financially free. I wanted to use this historical analogy because it is a lot easier for the modern viewer to see class distinctions from a historical perspective. It's pretty easy to see the differences between the nobles who owned the land and the peasants and slaves who worked the land. But because of industrialization, these class distinctions have been blurred. And the point of the historical analogies is to highlight the similarities so you can still see there is still an economic divide between those who own and those who work. And you want to be on the side of those who own the things that drive the modern world, because that puts you on the top of the financial hierarchy. It allows you to collect passive income and become truly financially free. Thank you for watching, and I highly encourage you to check out the article I wrote on Medium about this topic. I think Medium is a great platform because it has a lot of interesting articles. So if you want access to all the articles I have written and a lot of articles that other people have written as well, then I encourage you to sign up for Medium membership. I put the link in the description below. Also, subscribe for more personal finance content. And once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.